The low hum of the alien transport ship cut through the humid air as Parker Thompson stared out at the dense jungle that covered most of Nexus 9. Through the transparent barrier field, he could see the fluorescent vegetation pulsing with a strange bioluminescence that turned the night into a sea of purple, blue, and green light. Behind him, the anxious voices of the Vexarian science team grew louder. "Absolutely not, Parker. We have strict protocols in place for a reason," Dr. Zell said, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a clear sign of Vexarian agitation. "That jungle has claimed the lives of 7 expedition teams. Even the Vexarian military avoids it." Parker turned away from the viewport and faced the alien scientist. Despite being nearly 7 feet tall, Dr. Zell's lanky frame and delicate features made him look almost fragile compared to Parker's solid build. "That's exactly why I need to go," Parker replied, crossing his arms. "Those missing teams had families, colleagues. They deserve answers, and your fancy scanning equipment isn't getting us anywhere." Zell's second set of arms emerged from beneath his lab coat, a sign he was becoming increasingly stressed. "The Kryxus is out there. Nothing survives an encounter with it. Nothing. The ecosystem on Nexus 9 evolved in isolation for millions of years. The apex predator of this jungle has no natural enemies." The other 3 Vexarian scientists nodded in agreement, their skin shifting to a pale yellow, their species equivalent of fear. "We did not bring a human xenobiologist all the way from Earth to lose him on the first exploration," said Dr. Nira, the only female Vexarian on the team. Her voice was softer, but carried a firmness that made Parker pause. "Your psychological profile indicates high risk-taking behavior, Mr. Thompson. This is why we're having this conversation now instead of retrieving your remains later." Parker sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. He'd spent 8 years studying alien ecosystems across 3 star systems, but never had he encountered a place so stubbornly resistant to scientific inquiry. The jungle of Nexus 9 somehow jammed most scanning equipment, and the few drones they'd sent in had either malfunctioned or been destroyed. "I appreciate the concern, but I didn't travel 22 light years to sit in a research station and stare at incomplete data," Parker said, pulling his expedition pack from beneath his bunk. "I'm going in with or without your approval. The only question is whether I'll have your support, Doctor." Zell's skin now pulsed between yellow and gray frustration mixed with fear. "You humans and your obsession with physical presence, what do you hope to accomplish that our technology cannot?" "Sometimes you need human eyes and human instincts," Parker replied, checking his oxygen analyzer and slipping it into his pack. "Your species evolved in desert conditions. You're brilliant scientists, but you're not built for this kind of environment. I am. And the Kryxus, Doctor?" Nira asked quietly. "It has taken down armed military units. What makes you think you can survive what they could not?" Parker zipped up his pack and stood. "Because I'm not going in to fight. I'm going in to understand." 6 hours later, Parker stood at the edge of the jungle, the research outpost a gleaming metallic structure behind him. The Vexarians had reluctantly provided him with emergency supplies, a basic communication device that probably wouldn't work once he was deep enough into the jungle, and a final warning to turn back. "The plant life alone can kill you," Dr. Zell had said during their final briefing. "Toxins we haven't even cataloged yet, and the Kryxus. We have only blurry images from damaged recording equipment. 6 limbs, exoskeleton possibly, estimated weight of 300 kilograms. It hunts by sound and movement." Parker adjusted his pack and activated his recording device. Day 1, Entry Point Alpha. Beginning jungle exploration of Nexus 9 at 0600 local time. He took his first step into the dense foliage, immediately enveloped by the strange smells and sounds of the alien ecosystem. The plants seemed to react to his presence, some curling away while others reached out with feathery appendages. The ground was spongy beneath his boots, and the air felt thick with moisture, and something he couldn't quite identify. 3 hours in, Parker's confidence began to waver. The jungle had become increasingly dense, forcing him to use his machete to cut through vine-like growths that seemed determined to block his path. His skin itched from the constant contact with alien spores, despite the protective coating he'd applied before entering. Day 1, 0900 hours, he recorded, pausing to catch his breath. Jungle density increasing. Noticeable patterns in vegetation arrangement suggest either intelligent plant life or symbiotic relationships with fauna I haven't encountered yet. A sudden rustling from above made him freeze. Parker slowly looked up, his hand moving to the stunner at his hip, the only weapon the Vexarians had allowed him to bring. Through the canopy, he could see something large moving from branch to branch, but it was gone before he could get a clear view. Possible animal sighting, he whispered into his recorder. Size suggests mid-tier predator, but movement too quick for detailed observation. As he continued deeper, the jungle seemed to close in around him. The bioluminescent plants grew brighter as the canopy thickened, blocking out the natural light of Nexus' 9 twin suns. The effect was disorienting, a perpetual twilight filled with shifting colors and shadows. By nightfall, Parker had set up a small camp in what appeared to be a relatively safe clearing. He activated the energy barrier the Vexarians had given him, a thin field that would keep smaller creatures at bay while he slept. As he ate his ration pack, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Day 1, final entry, he recorded, his voice lower now. Something's tracking me, I can feel it. The Vexarians weren't exaggerating about this place. It's alive in a way I've never experienced before. Not just the organisms within it, but the jungle itself feels like a single entity. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange calls echoing through the jungle and the constant movement of the vegetation around his campsite. When he finally woke fully, Parker was drenched in sweat despite the regulated temperature of his sleeping unit. Day 2 brought rain, thick, heavy drops of slightly acidic water that hissed when it hit certain plants. Parker continued his journey, now moving toward what appeared to be the remains of one of the lost expedition teams. His scanner had picked up a faint energy signature that matched Vexarian technology. Day 2, 1100 hours, he recorded as he carefully made his way down a slippery incline. Approaching coordinates of the third expedition's last known location, visibility poor due to rainfall. Strange behavior from local fauna, they seemed to be seeking shelter not from the rain itself, but from something else. He reached the site just as the rain stopped. What he found made his blood run cold. The Vexarian expedition's equipment lay scattered across a small clearing, torn apart and partially buried under new growth. Of the team themselves, he found only fragments, a piece of exoskeleton here, a shredded uniform there. This wasn't just an attack, Parker muttered into his recorder as he examined the scene. This was methodical, deliberate. A low growl emanated from the jungle behind him. Parker froze, then slowly turned. Through the dense foliage, he caught a glimpse of something massive moving parallel to his position, not approaching, but not retreating either, just watching. I think I've made visual contact with the Kryxus, he whispered, heart pounding in his chest. It's bigger than the Vexarians described. He caught another glimpse as the creature moved 6 powerful limbs, a segmented body covered in what looked like natural armor, and a head that featured multiple sensory organs. It was unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history, not quite insectoid, not quite reptilian, but something uniquely Nexus 9. Parker slowly backed away from the expedition site, keeping his eyes on the spot where he'd seen the predator. The jungle had gone eerily silent, as if every living thing was holding its breath. When night fell, Parker didn't set up camp. He kept moving, using the bioluminescent plants to guide his way. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming now. Twice more he caught glimpses of the Kryxus, always at the periphery of his vision, always keeping pace. Day 2, 2200 hours, he recorded, voice barely above a whisper as he crouched beneath a large fern-like plant. The Kryxus is stalking me. It's intelligent far more than a simple predator should be. It's herding me toward something. By dawn of the third day, Parker was exhausted. He'd barely slept, moving constantly to avoid giving the Kryxus an opportunity to attack. but the creature seemed content to follow, to observe. It didn't make sense according to any predatory behavior he'd studied. Day 3, 0600 hours, he recorded, his voice hoarse from thirst despite his water rations. I've changed my theory. I don't think the Kryxus killed those expeditions because they were prey. I think they violated some territory or rule I don't yet understand. As the twin suns rose higher, Parker found himself entering a part of the jungle that was markedly different. The plants here were older, more established. The ground sloped upward toward what appeared to be a massive, ancient tree, if tree was even the right word for the towering organism that dominated the landscape. I'm approaching what appears to be a central point in the ecosystem, he recorded, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his fear. The vegetation patterns all seemed to radiate from this location. As he got closer to the massive tree, Parker noticed strange markings on its trunk, not natural patterns, but deliberate symbols carved into the bark like exterior. They reminded him of the pictographs from ancient Earth civilizations, but with a complexity that suggested a much more advanced form of communication. These markings, he whispered, reaching out to touch one of the symbols. There, a deafening roar shook the jungle around him. Parker spun around to see the Kryxus emerge from the foliage, fully visible for the first time. It was magnificent and terrifying, nearly 4 meters long, its 6 legs ending in what looked like both claws and manipulative digits. Its armored hide shimmered with iridescent patterns that seemed to shift and change as it moved. But what struck Parker most were its eyes, 8 of them, arranged in a pattern around its head, all fixed on him with an intelligence that was unmistakable. "Oh God," Parker breathed, backing up against the ancient tree. "You're not just a predator, are you?" The Kryxus approached slowly, its movements deliberate. Parker's hand moved to his stunner, but he knew it would be useless against such a massive creature. Instead, he did something that went against every survival instinct. He sat down, placed his weapons on the ground beside him, and waited. The creature stopped, clearly surprised by this behavior. It circled Parker once, twice, its sensory organs examining him from every angle. Then, to Parker's astonishment, it sat as well, its massive form settling onto the jungle floor a few meters away. For hours, they simply observed each other. Parker occasionally spoke softly, explaining who he was and why he had come. The Kryxus made no sound, but its eyes never left him. As night fell, Parker's exhaustion finally caught up with him. Despite his best efforts to stay awake, he drifted off to sleep with the apex predator of Nexus 9 still watching him. He woke to something nudging his leg. The Kryxus was standing over him, one of its limbs gently prodding him awake. In the pale light of dawn, Parker could see that they were surrounded by other jungle creatures, smaller versions of various species he'd glimpsed during his journey, all keeping a respectful distance. "What is this?" Parker murmured, slowly sitting up. "Some kind of gathering." The Kryxus made a series of clicking sounds, then turned and walked a few paces away before looking back at Parker. The message was clear: follow me. Against all logic and training, Parker did. The Kryxus led him deeper into the jungle, to places where the vegetation grew in patterns too regular to be natural. They passed structures that could only be described as buildings, though they were so integrated with the living jungle that they were almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. "Day 4, Parker recorded as they walked. "I believe I've discovered why the scanning equipment failed. This isn't just a jungle, it's a civilization. The Kryxus isn't just a predator, it's a sentinel, a guardian." They reached what appeared to be a central clearing dominated by a pool of luminescent liquid. The Kryxus stopped at the edge and dipped one of its limbs into the pool. The liquid began to glow brighter, changing colors in what seemed like a sequence. Suddenly, Parker's head was filled with images, not words, but concepts, emotions, memories that weren't his own. He gasped and fell to his knees as the mental connection established itself. The Kryxus was communicating directly with his mind, showing him the history of Nexus 9. The jungle wasn't just an ecosystem. It was a vast, interconnected network of semi-sentient plant life and fully sentient animal species that had evolved together in perfect symbiosis. The Kryxus was one of several guardian species that maintained the balance. The Vexarian expeditions had been destroyed not out of simple predatory instinct, but because they had begun harvesting plant specimens without understanding their place in the network. Each plant was connected to the whole, and removing them caused pain throughout the entire system. "They didn't know," Parker whispered, understanding flowing through him. "We didn't know." More images filled his mind, the Kryxus, showing him how the jungle had begun to sicken in the areas where the Vexarians had taken samples. How the Guardians had tried to warn them, to herd them away from sensitive areas, but the aliens had responded with weapons. Parker saw the conflict through the Kryxus's eyes, not a predator attacking prey, but a desperate defender trying to protect its home. When the mental connection faded, Parker sat in stunned silence. The Kryxus waited patiently, its eyes still fixed on him. "I understand now," Parker finally said. "And I'll make them understand too, but I need your help." Over the next 2 days, Parker and the Kryxus traveled together through the jungle. The massive predator showed him the true nature of Nexus 9 ecosystem, the symbiotic relationships, the communication methods, the delicate balance that had evolved over millions of years. Parker recorded everything, taking care not to disturb anything as the Kryxus guided him. He learned that what the Vexarians saw as simple plant life was actually part of a vast neural network that spanned the entire jungle. The Kryxus and creatures like it were the mobile components of this network, its defenders, its caretakers, its voice. Day 6, final jungle entry, Parker recorded as they approached the edge of the jungle where he had first entered. "I'm returning to the research station with a complete understanding of why the previous expeditions failed. The Kryxus has agreed to accompany me, a gesture of trust and an opportunity for direct communication with the Vexarians." The sun was setting as Parker emerged from the jungle, the massive form of the Kryxus perched improbably on his shoulders. It had insisted on this arrangement, a symbolic gesture that would be immediately understood by the watching Vexarians. And watching they were. Through the research station's viewports, Parker could see the entire science team staring in disbelief, their skin cycling through colors he'd never seen them display before. Dr. Zell was the first to emerge from the station, his forearms raised in what Parker now recognized as a gesture of submission and peace. "Parker Thompson," the Vexarian scientist said, his voice trembling, "you return carrying the alpha predator of Nexus 9 on your shoulders. This is unprecedented." Parker carefully lowered the Kryxus to the ground beside him. The creature remained calm, its intelligent eyes scanning the Vexarian research team. "It's not a predator, Zell," Parker said, placing a hand gently on the Kryxus's armored back. "At least, not in the way we understood. It's a guardian, a sentinel of the most complex ecosystem I've ever encountered." Over the next few hours, Parker explained everything he had learned. The Vexarians listened in stunned silence as he described the neural network that spanned the jungle, the semi-sentient plant life, the guardians like the Kryxus that maintained the balance. "The reason your expeditions failed," Parker concluded, "is because they were harvesting parts of what is essentially a single organism. Imagine if someone started cutting pieces off your body for study." Dr. Nira approached cautiously, her skin now a deep blue of wonder and scientific curiosity. "But how did you communicate with it? Our translation technology failed completely." "Because you were trying to translate language," Parker explained. "They don't communicate with words. They use a form of telepathy facilitated by certain compounds in the bioluminescent plants." "The Kryxus showed me." To demonstrate, Parker led the Kryxus back to the edge of the jungle where one of the glowing plants grew. He carefully broke off a small leaf, causing a luminescent fluid to drip onto his hand. When he touched this to his temple, then to Dr. Zell's, the Vexarian scientist gasped as the mental connection formed. For several minutes, Zell stood rigid as the Kryxus communicated directly with his mind. When the connection broke, the Vexarian scientist fell to his knees, all 4 of his arms trembling. "By the stars," Zell whispered. "We've been so blind. This isn't a research site, it's a first contact situation." Over the following weeks, A new approach to studying Nexus 9 was established. The Vexarians, under Parker's guidance, learned to communicate with the jungle's sentient network through the bioluminescent compounds. Research shifted from extraction and analysis to observation and cooperation. The Kryxus, whose actual name was a complex emotional concept that roughly translated to Defender of the Connected Ones, became a regular visitor to the research station. Other Guardians eventually followed, each bringing new insights into the complex civilization that had evolved in isolation. 3 months after his journey into the jungle, Parker stood at the edge of the research station's platform, watching as a delegation of Vexarian scientists prepared to enter the jungle not as researchers this time, but as guests, invited by the Guardians to witness a seasonal change in the neural network that happened only once every 50 years. "You've changed everything, Parker," Dr. Nira said, joining him at the railing. Her skin glowed with the soft green of admiration and respect. "The Science Council has established new protocols for all potential first contact situations based on your experience here." Parker smiled, watching as the Kryxus waited patiently for the Vexarian delegation. "I just listened when everyone else was trying to analyze. Sometimes understanding requires surrender, not conquest." "A very un-Vexarian philosophy," Nira admitted with a gesture that Parker had learned was their equivalent of a smile. "Perhaps that's why we needed a human perspective." As the delegation departed, led by the massive Guardian that had once been feared as an unstoppable killing machine, Parker couldn't help but reflect on how close they had come to destroying something beautiful through simple misunderstanding. His recording device sat on the table beside him, filled with the most comprehensive documentation of a truly alien civilization ever compiled. When the data reached Earth, it would revolutionize xenobiology, first contact protocols, and humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. "They told me not to enter the jungle," Parker said quietly, watching as the Kryxus disappeared into the luminescent foliage with the Vexarian scientists. "But sometimes you have to ignore warnings to find the truth." Nira's skin rippled with colors that indicated agreement. "The Kryxus has asked about your world. It is curious about Earth's ecosystems. Would such an exchange be possible?" Parker considered the implications a Guardian of Nexus 9 visiting Earth, experiencing the diversity of his home planet. "The bureaucratic hurdles would be enormous, the scientific value incalculable." "I think that could be arranged," he said with a smile. "After all, understanding goes both ways." 6 months later, Parker stood in the controlled environment chamber of Earth's Xenobiology Research Center, watching as the Kryxus explored the carefully recreated habitats of Earth's rainforests, deserts, and tundra. The Guardian moved with the same careful precision it had shown in its native jungle, its sensory organs taking in every detail. Scientists from a dozen nations observed from behind observation panels, their expressions mirroring the same awe and disbelief that Parker had seen on the Vexarians' faces when he'd first emerged from the jungle with the Kryxus on his shoulders. "What does it think of Earth?" asked Dr. Elena Voss, the center's director, her voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the moment. Parker smiled, touching the small vial of bioluminescent compound he now kept with him always. "It thinks we're very strange a world where the plants and animals evolved separately instead of as a unified network. But it's fascinated by our diversity, by how many different paths evolution took here." The Kryxus turned toward them, its intelligent eyes finding Parker through the observation panel. It raised one of its front limbs in the greeting gesture they had established between them. "You know," Parker said, returning the gesture, "when the Vexarians warned me about entering that jungle, they thought they were protecting me from the most dangerous predator they'd ever encountered." "Instead, you found an ambassador," Elena said. Parker shook his head, watching as the Kryxus carefully examined a butterfly that had landed on one of its limbs. "No," he corrected gently. "I found a teacher." As the Kryxus continued its exploration of Earth's environments, Parker knew that this was just the beginning. The Guardian's visit would open doors to new understanding between species, between worlds. The jungle of Nexus 9, once feared, would become a destination for scientists seeking to understand one of the most unique evolutionary paths ever discovered. And it had all started because he had ignored a warning and entered a jungle that no one was meant to survive. Sometimes, Parker said quietly, more to himself than to Alina, you have to face the thing you fear most to discover it was never what you thought it was. The Kryxus, as if hearing his thoughts, turned once more toward Parker. Through the compound-facilitated connection they now shared regularly, a simple concept flowed between them, not quite gratitude, not quite friendship, but something uniquely their own. A connection between two sentient beings from worlds that could not be more different, finding common ground in mutual respect and understanding. And as Parker returned the sentiment, he knew that this not the data, not the scientific breakthroughs, but this moment of genuine connection across the vast gulf of evolution was the true treasure he had carried out of the jungle on his shoulders.